You know, it's surprisingly unsurprising how familiar I am with Ninja Theory's work, despite the fact that I can't ever consistently remember that they even exist. If you're familiar with them, it's probably due to this infamous joke.
Not in a million years.
Although I'd hope you're more hip to them due to the praise Hellblade received for having such a faithful portrayal of a schizophrenic character, and not because they also fumbled the bag at attempting to create an online melee-based character brawler title. While Bleeding Edge never really worked out, I kind of consider it a monument to just how dedicated Ninja Theory is to the character brawler genre. Whether or not Microsoft forced them to make this game, or it was their own pitch, the fact that they made it an arena brawler instead of yet another run-of-the-mill shooter I think says a lot about the faith they have in this genre. They could have easily gave up the ghost after Kung Fu Chaos, which I suppose you could say is a theoretical predecessor to Bleeding Edge. Instead, they kept pushing with Heavenly Sword. It seems like the industry was still against them after this game as well, because Sony apparently pulled a Sony and just kind of straight up canned a sequel. And since Sony owned the IP of Heavenly Sword, and probably still does to this day, it gave Ninja Theory no choice but to break it off with Sony and eventually get started on Enslaved. A game that I think is both really cool, but also really unambitious conceptually in a lot of ways. It can't be easy having to essentially start over from scratch again when you're now 3 projects in, but those are the cards Enslaved was dealt. And yet Ninja Theory still chose to focus on a melee combat system while just adding some puzzle platformer elements to supplement it. I gotta give it to these guys. They know what they like doing. A dev team that once aspired to be an industry juggernaut, but after being repeatedly slapped in the face by industry juggernauts, they decided to ride their own wave, sticking with the gameplay they know best. A story that sounds all too familiar in this industry, but one that I think is a lot more relatable for the average person. Makes me hope that one day I will also be just as forgettably successful at doing what I like to do as they are. The setup to this plot cannot be any more video game-ish in the best way. 2 unfortunate souls find themselves in captivity. One of them randomly escapes and manages to send the airship they're on into an emergency by pressing a few buttons on a console. Shit starts blowing up and the player character is now on a race to get to the escape pods, hot on the trail of this mysterious woman. Some poor dude gets his brain fried for being disobedient, and the ship's defense system still somehow finds the time to activate its robotic guards as the player happens to walk by them. After barely making it to the last escape pod, our player character holds onto it for dear life as it gets shot out of a cannon, just to apparently faceplant into a brick wall that finally sheds him off of the capsule, and survives a fall that would at least break a few bones. But since this is a video game, he just gets up from it like he still has another round to fight. Oh, and did I mention that the ship also nearly crashes into the Statue of Liberty? The opening here is kind of bonkers, and I love it. The ridiculousness of the situation is only rivaled by how fast it goes from controlled to chaotic off the back of a single girl turning a few knobs. The security of the opposition in this narrative must be super lax. Either that or this ship was designed by Elon Musk. This random console next to a collection of Dragon Ball Z space pods managed to create an internal failure so catastrophic that niggas had to abandon ship! Our 2 leads, Monkey and Trip Taka, couldn't have met under crazier circumstances. Trip only makes it wilder by strapping a slave headband onto Monkey. While she seemed pretty fine escaping the ship by herself, getting across the post-apocalyptic wasteland is a different story. Not only does this headband allow Trip to melt Monkey's brain at the snap of a finger, but it's also linked to her vitals, so if she dies, so does Monkey. Thus begins their tentative, odd couple relationship. The first half of the game is dedicated to these 2 characters carving out a path back to the now crashed airship. With any luck, Monkey is hoping his motorbike managed to survive the wreck. It doesn't take a psychic to guess that he isn't exactly happy being in this predicament. The way he chooses to express this is through dry, dark humor.
To get you home as fast as possible so that you can take this thing off my head and I can break your neck.
Whether or not Monkey is being serious about this doesn't seem like something Trip is ready to acknowledge. I assume since their goal here is to get her home safely, she's probably banking on the fact that Monkey will have a pretty tough time attempting to go watermelon smashing with her head when she's surrounded by people that are ready to defend her. Although, it does make me wonder what her people would think of her when it eventually comes out that Trip made Monkey do this. She does acknowledge that it'd probably be impossible to make it home without Monkey's help, but I don't think she really understands the full scope of things until she actually sees Monkey in danger for her sake.
If we're gonna get through this, then when I ask you to do something, you need to do it immediately.
Okay. I understand.
One thing that I think makes forced team-ups interesting in fiction is the opportunity for personalities to butt heads. The closer the two characters come to scrapping with each other, the closer I am to turning into Michael Cole. But incessant bickering isn't really something that happens between Monkey and Trip very often. In fact, Monkey is usually pretty well-tempered with her, or at the very least, he isn't trying to argue with her every chance he gets, even though Trip definitely owes him an explanation for why her first instinct was to put this slave device on him when he was unconscious in the first place. She obviously doesn't harbor any hatred towards Monkey, or else she wouldn't be apologizing every time he brings the headband up. So my question is, why did Trip find it necessary to put some random dude under her control instead of just asking him for help first? While it would be a little foolish to assume Monkey would be in the mood to help Trip after she basically just left him for dead on that airship, she also doesn't come across as an inherently cruel person either. She isn't exactly a hero, that's for sure. The whole airship fiasco definitely wasn't a situation of her trying to be one. But when Monkey gets a little gassed, Trip shows concern for him. Monkey tells her that if she's really that concerned about him, why not just take the headband off? Trip doesn't really have a response to this, which feels more like the fiction skirting around the million-dollar question here. In addition to this, outside of the one instance at the very beginning of their journey, Trip has had no reason to exert the headband's power over Monkey. She never even does it just to screw with him, and Monkey shows little signs of being blatantly disobedient. He's even very quick to assure her that she's in safe hands.
I'm gonna die here, aren't I? Just like everyone else did.
I ain't gonna let that happen.
While this might just be his fear of the headband talking, I still find it kind of strange how compliant, and more importantly forgiving, Monkey is of Trip, despite Trip giving Monkey plenty of reasons to be upset with her. She put the headband on him without his consent. She walked into a combat scenario without a plan. She neglected to stay put in the spot Monkey told her to, making her more vulnerable to a predator. When she sees an extremely valuable object, her priorities instantly switch from the deal they made to acquiring said object. Monkey displays very little resistance to a lot of this activity for the most part, and Trip doesn't seem too keen on justifying her actions to Monkey, despite how much those actions give him headaches. Like, seriously, what does Monkey have to gain by helping Trip get the power cell? It doesn't seem like Trip has any intentions to sell it, so how would its use benefit Monkey's position? While some of these actions can just be naturally understood as silly mistakes, one of the more obvious ones being when she can't figure out how to control the tank correctly on the bridge, why should Monkey care that her actions are intentional or not? He could easily just identify Trip as too much trouble for her own sake, much less his, which is something he starts to bring up once they arrive at the crash site, but Trip quickly diverts his attention. It's just something that I kind of wish they actually thought about more. And listen, I'm not saying either character needs to be abusive to the other, or that either of them needs to win this argument. All I'm saying is,
where's the beef?
Both characters have pretty decent defenses for why the other character may be getting on their nerves. Trip has been pretty amicable with Monkey, and he's been a little less than pleasant or thoughtfully responsive in return. On the flip side, I'm honestly surprised Monkey hasn't been more unpleasant considering he's being forced to do all of this against his will. I'm kind of looking for that old married couple vibe from both characters, but more importantly, I'd like to actually hear Trip say her piece on why she thought forcibly turning Monkey into her bodyguard was her only option. Like a deeper personal explanation, even if it's just something as simple as saying she was scared he refused to help her, especially after what happened on the airship. I just feel like there could have been a bit more conflict-driven development to their early relationship that would have allowed their emotions to boil over in a more natural way, you know what I mean? It would also give Trip some legitimate reasons to actually use the headband on Monkey when he starts acting up in these moments. If you'd allow me to reach into my suggestion bag a bit, I kinda like the idea of Trip being a character that suffers from trust issues, possibly due to some shit that happened in her past that she's unwilling to share with Monkey at first. Trip admits that she comes from a closed ecosystem of a community, which more than likely means she has limited and possibly even unhealthy experience interacting with people outside of it. While her attempts to engage with Monkey may be genuine, it's still muddled by the device she strapped to his head. In order to really drill home this idea that Trip is someone that's truly out of her element, and that's why she tends to have reactions to situations that put Monkey in bad spots, I don't think it hurt if she revealed something about her life that explains why she personally believes the headband is necessary, even though she doesn't have any real intentions to harm him. Of course, watching someone come to the horrifying realization that everyone they knew and loved has been turned into charred husks and they're now parentless can definitely do a lot of heavy lifting as well. Upon getting Trip back to her village, you can already tell that something ain't right. It's eerily quiet. People aren't where they should be, and Trip won't shut up about a guy who doesn't shut up about drawbridges.
Bridge goes up, bridge goes down. Mark finds that kind of thing hypnotic.
Trip,
Yes?
that's enough about Mark and bridges.
While this is obviously played off as a joke, I'd also like to think this is a sort of early coping mechanism for her before the truth fully starts to reveal itself. As she starts screaming at the horror of it all, she also seems to be completely invisible to all the enemies in the area as well. From a gameplay standpoint, I'm not going to complain about not needing to actively protect an ally character as they hysterically run around a still hostile environment. But from a narrative standpoint, this feels just a little goofy. Like, Monkey will catch up to Trip, spot her, and then enemies will conveniently show up from around the corner as Trip then proceeds to turn on the jets. What was the point of chauffeuring her across the wasteland if she can turn into Sha'Carri Richardson whenever she wants? Again, not complaining about this section gameplay-wise, it's just a scripted enemy gauntlet. I guess I just find it amusing how it's scripted. Oh, there she goes! At the end of this silly, but still very much traumatic chase, Monkey reminds Trip that the village still has an emergency shelter. If there were any survivors that didn't manage to flee the village, they'll more than likely be there. If Monkey was still concerned about the deal they made, I think he would have told her that this is where it ends. He did get her to where she wanted to go, and he pretty much single-handedly managed to remove a large portion of the threat that still lingers there. Instead, he attempts to console her. He wasn't exactly turning down the offer she made to him about staying at her village. But again, how much of this is just Monkey's desire to not get his brain scrambled? That's obviously a more hypothetical question that the fiction doesn't really need to answer, but what I'm saying here is that Monkey was already committed to Trip the moment he suggested that there may be survivors. At that point, it officially stopped being about the headband for him. This is a development that eludes Trip though, because when they gain access to the shelter and she sees her dad, she becomes blinded by grief and rage. For her, it's no longer about getting home anymore, but about getting revenge. And she selfishly decides to drag Monkey along with her, despite the fact that Monkey would probably help her whether or not the headband was still involved. Also, can we just take a second to discuss what the hell her dad was doing in this bomb shelter by himself? Like, did he just pull a Jerry when the mechs attacked and locked everyone else out of it? He then just watched everybody meet their gruesome ends on a surveillance setup before deciding that he had nothing else to live for, but not before leaving a message to the only person he still has left to live for? I know that this entire event is just for this dramatic reveal, but it's also really unclear how Trip's dad dies. My best assumption is that he was heavily wounded before getting to the shelter and then he just bled out. Still, I don't think it would have hurt to at least put a couple of survivors in the room with him to not only better clarify the story, but to also make him look like the hero that died saving them, something that Trip neglected to be at the start of the game. Anyway, after everything is said and done, Monkey and Trip hit the road again and she expresses confusion about this new situation with him.
You haven't said anything to me.
About what?
About how I broke our deal? To let you go?
Well, what do you expect me to say? You get home, you find your whole life wiped out, and you want to head back. I get it.
Monkey may be experiencing some empathy here, considering that his parents were also taken from him when he was a kid, though he never goes into detail as to whether or not he ever got his get back. The fact that Trip is still acknowledging the possibility that maybe what she's doing here is wrong is what still makes me wonder about her ultimate motivations for keeping Monkey in check with the device. It's almost like she's just waiting for Monkey to snap out on her. She just still doesn't seem to trust him enough to remove his chains yet for whatever reason, even though this guy just ran a literal gauntlet for her ass. This takes us into the second half of the game where we're introduced to Pigsy, a longtime family friend of Trip. As far as I can tell, Pigsy is a voluntary loner that chooses to live out in this junk-infested swampland. He's also a womanizer who raises the inappropriateness of the game from basically non-existent to moderate levels.
This machine is more incredible than my wettest dreams.
What did you just say?
This machine is more incredible than my wildest dreams.
That's not what you said.
Pigsy is obviously a joke, but he's also the only other person Trip can rely on at this point. It doesn't take much effort to convince him to join her revenge tour, I assume because he's probably bored out of his mind and he's running out of girly magazines. He proposes that if they want to bring the fight to Pyramid, their primary ops, then their best bet is by stealing their most powerful weapon, the Leviathan. I find it funny that no one has any objections to Pigsy's machinations. Sure, Monkey may question whether or not Pigsy is the right guy for the job, but this is also a massive undertaking. We're talking about stealing a super weapon here, and we're honestly expecting this crack team of blockheads to do it? A monkey man that can't afford to have an original thought. A pig dude that decided to set up his goon cave in the middle of a swampy junkyard, and a redhead that's too traumatized and pissed off to be thinking straight. I'm not saying they can't do it, I'm just saying you have to write a series of extremely convenient shenanigans to convince, and that's exactly what happens. I'm not complaining though, these shenanigans are kind of fun, and that the fiction does acknowledge that these events get pretty high on the shenanigans scale. I guess all that's really missing is the fact that nobody bothered to make a joke out of their collective lack of self-awareness. But before we get to those shenanigans, we have to go shopping with Pigsy first. This guy needs 4 mechanical doohickeys. 3 of them make sense. The last one just makes me ask what happened to the one we had. Seriously, Monkey and Trip already got a power cell when they went to go see that play. What happened to it? It never gets brought up again after they left the theater. Chekhov took his piece off the wall, but instead of firing it, he lost it in a creek somewhere off screen. Which I would be fine with if Trip actually said that, because it would be funny. But instead, we have to go get a new power cell for some reason to activate Pigsy's flying Type 2. Which leads me to believe that the writer just forgot that they already had one. Either that or the battery they do have is a AAA model while Pigsy needs a AA one. Futuristic solutions that still feature antiquated problems. Some things never change, I guess. Most of these items require you to engage in the tried and true video game method of going to a location and then beating some cheeks. I like how they make a joke out of it where the last item is just sitting there ready to be taken. One of the most valuable objects in this universe, vulnerable and completely unguarded. And then bam, you're in the ring with another monstrous machine. It's eventually revealed that Pyramid has been hoarding power cells for their super weapon, so I'll let you be the judge on how this group managed to stumble upon not just 1, but 2 of them out in the wild. Pigsy explains that he's been aware that this power cell has been here for the longest time. I assume he's just too bitch-made to get it himself. Acquiring these objects isn't really the focus here anyway though. It's more about the budding romantic relationship between Monkey and Trip. Pigsy, being the womanizer that he is, makes the decision to get his Mac on with Trip, but he wants to run it past Monkey first to make sure he isn't cock-blocking at all. Monkey tells him that he's free to shoot his shot, and when he crashes and burns, no thanks to the fact that Trip overheard everything that Pigsy was saying about her, he gets up in his feelings about it with Monkey. Monkey as a character has rarely, if ever, chosen to acknowledge any sort of romantic development happening between him and Trip. Even here, he still chooses to mostly ignore it, but obviously the fiction has been hinting at a possible romantic relationship, mostly from Trip's perspective. Pigsy was very clearly flying too close to the sun here, but being the third wheel allows him to see this relationship from a unique position should he take his sunglasses off. We'll come back to that later though. So if you hadn't already guessed, Pigsy doesn't really have a plan for how they're going to complete this heist. Dude just kind of casually flies into Pyramid airspace and expects to smooth talk his way past air traffic control. We've already established that he doesn't exactly have a gift for the gab, so they get shot out of the sky and have to conduct the rest of their infiltration on foot. I love how it gives you a vague idea of how they might have entered the dam, happening upon an open web of ventilation chutes before it transitions to Monkey and Trip attempting to force Pigsy into the entrance they actually located, making it plainly clear that Pigsy was too rotund to fit anyway. Despite this joke, I'll admit, getting into the dam was a little too easy. A UFO was just shot out of the air that detached an escape vessel. I feel like this is grounds to not only send a team to scope out where the escape pod landed, but also to beef up security at all entrances. Pyramid really cares very little about protecting their assets apparently. The Leviathan is being held underwater and the dam doubles as a facility to access it by submarine. Grabbing a sub requires a little bit of puzzle solving and a lot of patience with bacon-cooked dumbasses. But after that, all there's left to do is blow this metal monster out of its underwater prison, start it up, and stroll on out of there. It's really just that simple. The security only really starts ramping up at the beginning of the mech's activation sequence. Though I do like how Trip starts geeking out about how she's going to do this while Monkey gets stuck with all the hard stuff.
You know what? I'll just find off an entire army while you do that.
Sounds like a plan.
Quote unquote. So the Leviathan is officially on its way to Pyramid's main HQ. While it's unclear how long this journey will take them, Trip deems this a better time than ever to finally sit down and open up to Monkey. She comes to the revelation that she doesn't have a right to enslave anyone more than anyone else does, and finally turns off Monkey's headband. In the midst of experiencing his own revelation, Monkey simply tells her to turn it back on. This is an extremely sweet moment of Monkey realizing how much he actually likes being attached to Trip, but no greater feelings really get spilled here. While the straightforwardness of the scene still gets the job done and fits well with Monkey's character, it don't exactly feel very climactic in terms of their romantic status, which leads me to believe that this more romantic relationship was going to be further developed on in a sequel. This is like my third video on a game like this, so it should be pretty obvious at this point that a sequel is not in the cards for this one either. Plus, it should be clear by now that I'm just a little disappointed that Trip never reveals a more personal motivation for why she strapped a headband onto Monkey. The more general revelation she comes to is still good, I just think it would have been so much better with a more personal one on top of it. Again, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than just saying she was scared and confused, and that she let her emotions and predisposition to meeting strange people cloud her judgment. This would only give Monkey the opportunity to sympathize with her in this moment that much more. I'm not saying they need to start gushing to each other or nothing, but it would be nice to see Monkey finally get that guarded explanation from Trip. You could even make a callback to the exchange they had earlier, which I think would be really cool, and would help Trip truly understand what Monkey means when he says, "It is what it is." Upon reaching Pyramid, the team has to fight off a giant scorpion-like machine before it's revealed that there are several others just like it ready to engage. With spirits deflating and resources dwindling, Pigsy has an epiphany. The only way they could hope to survive this is if he sacrifices himself. I wouldn't exactly identify Pigsy as a stand-up dude. This is the same guy who willfully put Monkey in danger because he blames him for ruining his chances with Trip, will lie about losing a friendly race, and obviously has a self-inflated ego problem. In spite of all that, he still can't deny that Monkey and Trip are good for each other. For all the vanity Pigsy regularly engages with, he doesn't even bother making a big heroic speech here. Now, while you could blame this on the fact that the game's cutscenes focus more on being quick and concise as opposed to being narratively rich, I still think it's pretty fitting, development-wise, that Pigsy's only concern here is making sure that Monkey and Trip are safe.
That'll do, Pig.
After Pigsy turns himself into bacon strips, Monkey and Trip make their way inside Pyramid and are met with basically the Wizard of Oz, complete with the projected talking head. This guy is understood to be the figurehead of our primary opposition, Pyramid. Like, he is Pyramid. He explains that he's a being that lived long before the war that turned this world into a wasteland. Pyramid simply acts as a fabricated asylum for people that no longer wish to live in that world. This fabrication is built upon the pleasant pre-war memories of this being, and then shared on a massive scale with his subjects by way of the headband device. He then pleads with Monkey and Trip to stop what they're doing unless they want to spoil the party, and then entices Monkey to come see what he's missing. Why does it sound like I'm talking about drugs? Trip isn't buying it though, and decides to pull the plug on this operation herself, although she still wonders if she made the right call. The last shot is everyone starting to snap out of their dream states, leaving us with some pretty decent sequel bait. This ending is okay. I like the idea of the big baddie of this story just being some guy that wants to take everyone into his infinite Tsukuyomi. There's nothing more dangerous than an old dude with a god complex. But I also find it pretty silly that the same guy is trying to play innocent when he literally has his mechs out here barbecuing people, capturing them against their will and hard-boiling their brains if they refuse to submit. The fiction doesn't give any explanation for any of this fascist-like activity, but yet still expects the audience to believe that this guy's actions are altruistic. Even if you took all the fascism out of the story, what this guy's offering is still fabricated.
Memories aren't real, Beth.
While the life they're experiencing inside Pyramid may be more preferable to their current reality, are they truly living in it? The only reason why people need to survive in this world is because this psycho won't turn his freaking mechs off. What is the point of committing war crimes on a world that you don't even care about anymore? Pyramid was completely self-sufficient, just like Trip's village was. Yet this guy basically sends a hit squad out, runs everybody's shit, and then asks why niggas is mad at him. Like, bro, you created a super weapon. You're basically preparing for a nuclear doomsday while being the only superpower that has access to nukes, in a universe that has already experienced a nuclear doomsday. I don't know what I'm missing here, but it seems like the writer either forgot, neglected, or just straight up didn't have the money to round out this narrative a bit better in a few aspects. It's probably a combination of all three if I had to guess. This game reportedly only had 2/3 the budget Heavenly Sword did. I don't know how they managed to score a Hollywood writer in Alex Garland off the back of this, but something tells me that Garland was suffering from big head syndrome in this position. I'll get to that later though. Regardless, I do like this game's story. It's a good combination of goofy antics, adolescent humor, and sincere moments that I think are more than enjoyable. It's pretty apparent that games like these usually don't have the luxury of a large budget that allows them to craft a more fully fleshed out story to accompany them, despite the large ambitions that their stories usually want to achieve. I probably didn't have to go so large Marge on this game's story when considering this, but I wanted to take a slightly different approach this time around, and I figured a video about a game that nobody cares about would be just the opportunity to do it. I'm sure you could guess at this point that this game takes inspiration from Journey to the West. As far as I can tell, that inspiration doesn't seem to be any deeper than surface level. While I can't exactly say that for sure since I haven't actually read Journey to the West, so I don't know if this game is also trying to tackle any particular themes Journey to the West also attempted to explore, there are several similarities, such as mechs being a replacement for demons, characters like the monkey and the pig, as well as the monkey being kept in check by a headband device. Science fiction also takes precedence over any more fantastical elements. The concept of this game is pretty engaging at face value, but I think it's very much a wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle situation. The backstory here is extremely vague. Some kind of war happened, assumedly between machines and humans, that wiped out most of this world's population, and that's about it. There's no name for this war, there's no information given on what the war was about, there's no details on the factions that participated in it. So already, on a macro level, we don't really have a clear idea of what's going on in this universe. All we know is that machines now rule the world and are apparently still following their old programming, but we have no clue why Pyramid made them or programmed them to destroy all humans. And I think it'd be pretty interesting if it was made clear that Pyramid was involved with the war prior to this apocalypse. Okay, I'm about to go into deep theory mode here, but I promise it's interesting. What if Pyramid was actually just the name of the company that manufactured these mechs? Instead of being so on the nose about its location actually being in the shape of a pyramid, what if it was just the campus of this company's main office headquarters? What if Pyramid didn't originally design their mechs to be bloodthirsty death machines, but a freak catastrophe or maybe even a disgruntled employee caused them to become sentient and turn on all humans? What if this now former employee ends up regretting what they did and decides to atone for this act by turning Pyramid into a safe haven? As time passes, Pyramid is converted from just a safe haven into an escape from reality as the person behind it develops this headband technology. Now, many, many years later, everything about the old world has been forgotten to time, and the name Pyramid is now just associated with these violent machines, and the person behind Pyramid has no desire to change the perception that this destroyed world has of it, since they can't exactly undo what they did. So instead, they just accept that this current world is doomed and spends the rest of their days as a dream god to their subjects. Things like the slaver ships and the salvage operations can just be satellite programs that still carry the Pyramid brand, but aren't actually associated with what Pyramid is now, since they'll all be ran by the mechs. You gotta admit, I think that would be a much doper backdrop for this world than what the game actually tells us, which is pretty much little to nothing. Objects like the power cell, for instance, don't really seem to exist to be anything other than just a generic futuristic power source. Tripp comments on how invaluable they are, but then later on you literally walk into a room filled with them. Now, you could say that these little luminescent spheres are invaluable because Pyramid pulled a Pac-Man and gobbled them all up, but that seems to be as far as their importance really goes. An energy source like this seems like something people would feel more than justified spilling blood over. One of the collectibles in the game, the masks, are recognized as being a strangely reoccurring phenomenon to Monkey due to the headband, but the images that Monkey sees don't really have any real significance beyond just being creepy photographic pictures of the world before the war. It's like Ninja Theory just randomly went through somebody's picture book of the vacation they took last summer and called it a day. You could easily create a visual mini-narrative or some more interesting subliminal messages with more concentrated imagery that would give players a greater reason to collect all the masks. Monkey also makes mention of trading with other communities, meaning there are more people out there, but it's never mentioned if rebellions looking to fight back against the mechs exist as well. Knowing that there are coalitions out there attempting to take down their oppressors would definitely give the slavers more legitimate reasons to build that super weapon. There's just insane amounts of missed opportunity here that makes the world feel much smaller than it probably is. It's cool to look at, but I wouldn't say it's rich in environmental storytelling, despite how much the game likes to use fixed camera angles to control your attention. At best, all you'll see is the same few graffiti and sign assets everywhere. There just ain't a lot to geek out over here that doesn't also require you to take huge jumps and assumptions. While I could theorize about this game's
lore
all day, it doesn't really make up for the fact that it doesn't seem to acknowledge much of any of it. I doubt a lot of this stuff was left vague on accident, possibly due to budget issues, and maybe it was planned to be explored in a sequel. At least I'm hoping that's the case. I may also just be giving this game's writing too many mulligans. Initial drafts of the script apparently featured 2 hours of cutscenes before they cut it down to about an hour. I'm thinking this may be a situation of cutting too much fat here. The game's original writer and a founder of Ninja Theory, Tamim A, because I am not butchering his last name, mentions that when they brought on Alex Garland, his rewrites felt simplistic, and I can probably guess why Tamim felt like that. All of the context about the game's world he had possibly written probably got washed away by Garland. The story almost exclusively focuses on the character drama, with very little attention given to any outside context for it. And while I think the drama is done pretty well, the overall universe might have suffered a little too much for it as a result. Getting a movie screenwriter to write your game may sound good on paper, but allowing a game to just be a game doesn't exactly mean it has problems that need fixing, especially since the story feels very video game-ish to me anyway. So I'm not even really sure what Garland was attempting to fix here if this is the case. Again, Tamim made mention of Garland being intimidating. While he might have just been joking around when saying this, the vibes I'm getting here is that Garland may have had a control freak streak going on. He's the all-knowing writer passing his knowledge onto these ignorant developers. Still, this is just my guess. It's not like I think the writing here is terrible. I just feel like it could have done a lot more with this world than it did. Garland just didn't seem to think much world building was worth it. There are two sides to Enslaved's gameplay loop, the one where you have to get from point A to point B, and the one where you have to smash robots. Getting from point A to B is more on the automated side. Monkey's actions are mostly contextual, in that he will only jump if there is a barrier he can jump over or a gap he can cross. This means that there's virtually no way to fall to your death, since the game doesn't actually allow Monkey to fall off ledges unless it's scripted for him to do so. The only time when you're free of this limitation is when you're on the cloud, but the cloud itself also only has a handful of restricted areas in the game. So the platforming here really is just as simple as pressing a button while holding the stick in the right direction and waiting for an animation to play. Luckily, the animations in this game are pretty goated. I can imagine that this is where a lot of the budget went. So while you may be stuck watching them a lot of the time, at least they're pretty satisfying to look at. The actual challenge here comes from the events in which you're meant to race against the clock. Situations where if you don't move fast enough or time your movements correctly, you'll either die or take damage. Most of the time, at best, you'll just end up getting screwed over by the somewhat finicky directional pathing. But other times, it might just take you a second to figure out how and where Monkey is supposed to fling himself toward next. Pretty much just locating the next piece of shiny metal Monkey is supposed to latch onto as you play through the game. The only real control the player has over this process is when a pole shows up. When jumping to one, you can time your next button press so Monkey smoothly swings from it to the next handhold. I get the same type of joy from chaining multiple pole swings together as I do hitting someone with a red shell in Mario Kart. Just something stupidly satisfying about it that makes the endorphins go off in my monkey brain. You're not going to be getting too much else out of the platforming here, but the game does hit you with a puzzle every so often. They're decent environmental puzzles that usually require you to flip a few switches in the right sequence. A lot of them also ask you to interact with Trip in order to move objects for you. Speaking of Trip, mechanically, she pretty much functions as Monkey's ball and chain throughout the game. In terms of platforming, Trip will sometimes need help getting across a gap or up to a ledge. Monkey can also carry Trip on his back whenever he's near her. This feature is only really useful during a handful of scripted sequences, and mostly just serves as an adorable way for the player to idly interact with Trip. The companion AI pathing in this game is pretty competent, so Trip doesn't necessarily need someone to hold her hand as you traverse through a level with her. It is really cute though. What's not so cute is Trip just suddenly getting ready to drop Monkey when he gets too far away with barely even a warning first. This seems a little overboard for a game that also encourages the player to look around their environment. Trip has the means to straight up control Monkey's actions if she wants to, so why doesn't she just do that if she thinks he's cutting up? While this is a decent diegetic way to keep the player in check, it's also an all or nothing method and can make Trip look like a
crazy ass bitch.
Attempt to clear out some mechs before distracting them for her, she threatens to scramble your brain. Float into an innocuous area on the water, she threatens to scramble your brain. Jump in the wrong direction because you saw something shiny in the distance, she scrambles your brain. I have no idea why she's made to resort to such a drastic measure like this in gameplay. Sometimes in games with unclear boundary boxes, instead of just making the player die from mysterious causes, they'll just rip control away from the player and make the character walk back towards the playable area. Why couldn't they have just done this here and have Trip give Monkey a warning about getting too far away, and then have the player work on a 3-strike system during every level? Trip isn't the type of person who willfully wants to hurt another living creature. I think this would have been a much better way to reflect this in gameplay. Ludo-narrative dissonance for the sake of trollish feeling gameplay punishment aside, all these elements are still pretty well done. The cloud in particular is really fun to control. It's got just the right amount of weighty bounciness to it. I wish it had an obstacle course mode dedicated to it or something that really lets you dig your teeth into its physics. The restricted areas you're made to use it in just aren't really enough for me. This is just one half of the loop though, the other half being the combat. We've got your standard 2-button melee system, a light attack string with a singular heavy attack move that you can use as an alternate ender. Monkey also has a few crowd control tools in the form of a circular sweep and a stun attack that breaks enemy guards and shields. You can also use his bow staff as a long range tool for machines that are out of reach. I ain't gonna front, it took me a minute to wrap my head around this combat despite how simplistic it is. The biggest hurdle I made for myself was the fact that I didn't realize you needed to be holding a direction if you wanted to dodge cancel out of your attacks. This, for some reason, made me think that canceling your attacks at all was not an option. So for the longest time, I'm here thinking engaging in fights with more than 2 enemies was a ridiculous task. Nope, it just turns out I'm a dumbass. So yes, there is canceling, it just has to be during one of your light attacks. You can cancel the startup of your heavy attacks, but not once they become active. So your main strategy when whacking robots is to crowd control with the sweep move and stun attack, focus on doing damage with the light combo while only using the heavy ender if it's safe to do. Defensively, it's usually better to block than dodge. Enemies often throw out a string of oppressive moves that you're much more likely to get clipped by if you don't dodge right, since enemy attacks track you semi-decently and you don't exactly have the fastest, most responsive dodge here. There are some attacks that ignore your block though. Luckily, these attacks are only associated with specific enemy types, so as long as you stay mindful of what enemies you're up against in a fight, you should be fine. Every so often, the game will throw an interactable enemy into the mix. Doing enough damage to them will allow you to perform a special action with them that can provide some much appreciated utility. In scenarios where more range is needed, the staff has 2 different types of ammo to work with. One immobilizes while the other does damage. Once I got the hang of things, this combat went from nerve-wracking to pretty trivial at times, especially once I got all the upgrades. While this tree doesn't look spectacular, it definitely feels a bit overpowered. Having access to things like an instant win button after swinging your bow around a bit, as well as passive healing, is as generous of an upgrade tree as I've seen in recent memory. Purchasing these upgrades also isn't super demanding either. You unlock them with tech orbs, which double as the other collectible in the game, and as such, all the static ones floating around everywhere act as one-time pickups that contribute to your overall completion percentage. As upgrade currency, you also get them from defeated enemies. I dig a lot of what's here for what it is. While the platforming's a little limiting and the combat's pretty simple, the overall experience is solid. I only really have a few issues with it. The main one being that I think Trip's utility goes underutilized. I already mentioned the piggyback feature, but you can also do a couple other things with her that I never saw any real use for. You can pick up items that Trip can use to heal you, but the passive healing pretty much covers this, and Trip is usually never really in a position to heal you while in a fight anyway. You can also order Trip to come to your location, but this order is usually never available, nor is it really useful after its first tutorialized application and maybe a few other rare instances. Trip can EMP enemies that get a little too handsy with her, but anytime she's ever actually in danger is completely scripted, and happens only a handful of times throughout the game. The only ability she offers that feels even somewhat dynamic or useful is her decoy, and even then, it doesn't really take much strategy to use it efficiently. Trip isn't exactly dead weight, but the game also doesn't really do much to make the tandem gameplay feel very involved. I'm also not a huge fan of the bosses. One of them is just a repeat of the dog mech boss, except it has a mounted turret now, and another is just a Mexican bullfight. While there's only so much you can do with this combat system, these bosses still ain't really my jam. With all that said, the entire package on offer here does its job well enough. I just don't think I'd find myself replaying this game in full for one particular reason or another. There isn't really any specific aspect about the game that outshines any of the others, but I do think it melds those aspects together pretty well into a campaign that manages to keep my attention the entire time. We ain't quite done here though. There's still another campaign in the form of DLC that I want to give some attention. Pigsy's Perfect 10 features the titular Hogman on a quest to construct his ideal companion. The premise of the story is about as goofy as it sounds. It basically takes the item collection segment of the main narrative and stretches it to DLC length. As Pigsy acquires the items he needs, he continues to sniff his own farts about the situation while completely ignoring the companion he already has, a little robot named Truffles. After Pigsy carelessly shoves Truffles into his newly made robo-wife, she pulls a Looney Tunes and gets scooped up. Pigsy then proceeds to chase her down before she gets turned into a block of trash and realizes that Truffles was his true companion the whole time. The little flying TV then deactivates for good and leaves Pigsy with a new appreciation for having a friend. It's a good, simple story for a DLC that keeps the foolish vibes from the base game. Your enjoyment of it will still probably depend on how much you enjoyed the shooting mechanics in the base game though. What made those mechanics tolerable at the very least is that most of the targets you shoot at are stationary like 90% of the time. This game doesn't really have aim assists, so you aren't really getting the benefits of things like target smoothing or tracking, so it only really makes sense to shoot shit that either isn't moving or is so big you can't miss it when it's right next to you. Either that or spray and pray when using a minigun or turret. The same rules are somewhat true here. The biggest difference is that instead of Monkey's power pole, you're working with Pigsy's rifle, which not only has infinite ammo, but also a much higher rate of fire. The downside is that Pigsy's rifle is a lot weaker than Monkey's staff, so while it's a little easier and not as resource demanding to lock down an enemy and pelt them with bullets until they explode, it also takes an ass load of bullets to make them explode. To counteract this decrease in power, Pigsy can hit headshots, which are one-hit KOs. Getting headshots can still take a bit of work though, so as you play through the campaign, Pigsy will gain some additional gadgets. This DLC is fine. While I was getting a little frustrated with it towards the back half, the game at least understands that these shooting mechanics aren't exactly the greatest, which is why most of the tools only focus on either distracting enemies or stunning them, with routine use of them being pretty much required because Pigsy is made out of paper mache and can't really do much once an enemy gets in his face. I do like the idea of mixing and matching these tools to solve encounters, but the system is still working on these core shooting mechanics as your primary way to deal damage. So your only real options are to either distract enemies altogether or immobilize them for a long enough time to chain headshots to do that damage efficiently. It doesn't get any more engaging than that really. The collectibles are cute, but they aren't really any more significant than the collectibles in the base game, in that they're only here as a way to 100% it, which may appeal to my OCD, but I still don't see myself returning to this DLC because the shooter combat is only maybe marginally better than its implementation in the base game. I can appreciate that this DLC took a pretty creative direction from the base game, but that's all it really has going for it. That and I guess a greased up fat dude with too much time on his hands.
It's a fact. Women are the only works of art.
But I don't know too many people that actually want to roleplay as a Reddit moderator, which is still probably better than being an actual moderator. The power of video games, I guess. Or maybe it's just the poor reputation of Reddit moderators. Bro, could you imagine if this DLC was a commentary on Reddit moderators? That would actually be kind of savage. I'ma be real. This is probably one of the most average video games I've played in a minute. Solidly constructed and pretty well polished barring some PC specific issues, but not exactly something I'd be excitedly recommending to my friends back in the day. It just doesn't really do anything that really blows my nuts off or gets me intrigued to learn more about, either gameplay wise or lore wise. I think the absolutely barren wiki pages for this game means that I'm probably not alone in this feeling. It's a real shame too, because the potential that this game presents really is through the roof. There's so many things this game makes me think it could have done to make both its gameplay and its world a lot more interesting. There's the cutscenes where you see Monkey and Trip traveling to and from her village. I'm thinking you could turn these into more open gameplay sections where the player can ride around on Monkey's bike, do side activities, and meet other people scavenging around the wasteland. In the more linear levels, I'm thinking it'd be pretty cool if the player was given a few choices on how they can progress through it. Sort of like a Gears of War thing, where Monkey suggests they should do something his way, while Trip suggests they should do it her way, and then the player can decide which way they want to take. Not only do I think that this would better highlight the divide Monkey and Trip have in their thought processes, but would also add a little extra replay value to the levels. It could also possibly make things like the piggyback feature feel more useful depending on how you design this. Enslaved strikes me as a game that may have spent too much time in the oven, in a sense that the longer it was being worked on, the more flaws it was seeing with its own design. I can almost guess Alex Garland had a hand in this considering how much creative control he was apparently taking during development, to the point that they felt it was appropriate to credit him as a co-designer. As a result, I think this is a pretty good example of what happens when you have a screenwriter make your game. Great presentation in the delivery of its narrative with very little actual substance in that narrative, the world, or the gameplay for the sake of avoiding exposition. But unlike other fictional media like books or movies, video games have a lot more unique ways to be expositional. Look at the Dark Souls games. Those games are literally nothing but mountains of expositional information. It's just that the majority of it is usually unnecessary for the player to engage with and still finish the game, compared to a book or movie, which usually have little other choice but to force their exposition onto the audience short of them just skipping past those parts, which is why they have to be more thoughtful about how expositional they are. Still, it's not like I despise this game for trying to be a movie or something. I do like a lot of the more cinematic touches it has, such as the action shots you get when Monkey crushes the last enemy in a fight. Those are really cool. Ninja Theory still made something they clearly had a lot of interest in, which is something I appreciate about them to this day. While they'll probably never be that blockbuster dev team they wanted to be when they first formed, they are fortunate enough to continue doing what they like doing in the way they like doing it. That, to me, is what makes them successful even though all of their original games don't exactly fly off the shelves, and I'll probably forget about them again as soon as I finish this video, but hey, you probably either forgot about me or never heard of me before I put out this video, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm halfway there, baby!